Hey there, Ed McCormack here, founder of the crypto education platform, Dchained. Today's video, we're going to change things up slightly. Still going to talk about a major trend going on in the crypto world that can ultimately help you increase your overall portfolio. But at the same time, we're going to take a moment just to talk about how the underlying blockchain technology is helping to address a major issue that exists in society today, which is the growing wealth gap between those with resources and opportunities and those without. And while what we're going to talk about is not going to change the systemic issues that exist around the world, it is an opportunity for individuals to change their financial situation and their family's financial situation. And that's why it's important for us to cover that right now. So before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room. And as you could tell, as a white, male, heterosexual, born in the US, by definition, it's given me opportunities that many others in society just simply have not been afforded. And while I can't change how, where, when I was born, what I can do is increase the overall responsibility on myself to share opportunities that can help others improve their financial situation. And that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to start, before we go into the investment opportunity and the trends, I first want to just talk about the problem. And the problem being the growing wealth gap that exists specifically here in the US. And when you look at right now the different generations in the US, going from the silent generation, which is the elderly who at this point are either passing away or giving their wealth over to their kids and the grandkids, all the way down to the baby boomers, Gen X, and then Millennials. Now there are other generations after Millennials, but these are individuals who are either in their teen years or just starting their careers. And I don't want to yet compare them to the other generations because they just haven't had the time. But what I do want to highlight here is that when you start to see the overall distribution of wealth across the generations, there is a massive disparity between the baby boomers, Gen X, and Millennials. And you might say, well, baby boomers have had more time, and you are correct. But what also has happened is that Gen X in particular has stepped into a phase where they are now double caregivers. They're not only taking care of many of their elderly parents, but also many of them have kids that are now moving back home. So they are now taking on extra burden and ultimately having to increase their overall earnings and income in order to meet their daily and monthly requirements. Millennials, on the other hand, are a generation that came into their own ultimately at one of the worst times. They were graduating college around the housing crisis. During COVID, they were the ones ultimately who were most cash-strapped because these are people who didn't really have the time to build up these big portfolios that are going to be able to generate income that would give them a little bit of extra time and breathing room if they were to lose their job. Just simply never happened. And in order to visualize this, look at the difference between Gen X and Millennials as they go through that 25 to 40-year-old age. At the beginning of that, they're a little close. Millennials are even doing a little bit better, but it quickly deviates. And when you ask yourself, what is the reason why it deviates so much? And while there are a number of variables that we could talk about, real estate and ownership of homes is a key component. And it's actually one of the central pieces that past generations have used to build their wealth and ultimately change the financial situation for their family and generations to come. And this is an issue that millennials are in particular facing, given major challenges that are inhibiting them from getting involved in this space. So let's just talk about that briefly. When you look at 3 reasons why millennials just simply aren't getting into the market, well, one is money. So if you're talking about residential, the fact is that after COVID, the prices of homes have skyrocketed. Many instances, you're even seeing homes that are only taking cash. They're not allowing you to actually take out a mortgage. If you're looking at commercial, this is where things get even more bleak, because oftentimes to even get into those deals, you need 6 figures, which ultimately takes us to the second factor, which is you need to have the network in order to get in on these sweet, sweet deals. If you don't know the people who are actually cutting these deals, you're not going to be able to ultimately get into them and improve and get all those returns that all these other people have been getting for years and decades. Which ultimately takes us to the third piece, which is time and liquidity. And I'm going to talk this more on the commercial side, because if you do have that access and you do have 6 figures to get into these commercial deals, the fact is you have to lock it up for 10 years. You can't touch it. So in many cases, it's really limiting in terms of the people that have the money, have the network, and also can part ways for 10 years with 6 figures. It just is such a demotivating and ultimately exclusive opportunity. And this is where blockchain comes into play. And this is where you have a huge opportunity. So let's talk about that. With blockchain and ultimately the technology allowing, for one, buyers and sellers to connect, so it decentralizes a lot of this process. You don't need that network. It ultimately allows for greater transparency, so you could see more information in terms of the actual deals, the deal flows, the financials on these properties. And then, as we see in the NFT space, ownership is a critical component. And it also allows the transfer of ownership in a much more seamless way. And this is where you are seeing platforms like T0, which is a secondary market where buyers and sellers can transact with one another, as well as new and emerging platforms like NYCE, which is effectively like a Robinhood for real estate. You get their app, they have all their different listings, and you could make micro investments for as little as $10. So this is a huge opportunity for individuals who might not have the money, the time, or the network in order to get into real estate deals. So what does the future now look like when it comes to real estate? Well, let's answer that very briefly. When you look at where blockchain is today, and ultimately the core value in how it offers up real estate, it's through this process called tokenization. Simply put, it helps a property owner ultimately carve out equity, make that a corporate entity, so it's owned by an entity that is legal and has it fits within overall compliance of law, and then that operating office can then take that equity and break it into smaller pieces so that people can ultimately get involved. So good example of this is St. Regis Resort in Aspen. So St. Regis Resort in Aspen, 5-star, 179 room, beautiful resort. And what they wanted to do was raise money. And one of the ways that they did that was through this equity round where they took 19% equity, created a corporate entity through T0, which is that secondary platform. And in effect, what T0 then did was they broke that equity into teeny pieces, made a coin around it called Aspen, and allowed people to buy and sell it and trade very freely. So it made it very tangible and very easy for me to buy and sell. And this is something that we're seeing more and more of. It's called fractionalized ownership. And when we start to look at the overall market today, one of the biggest inhibitors, keeping us from really seeing to this point, this explosion in real estate, is the fact that institutional investors and building owners have been slow to adopt it. But that's not discouraging if you think about the fact that the biggest sector in all of blockchain is decentralized finance, and you don't get any less motivated and ultimately a crowd that wants to change the way that they've operated for hundreds of years than the finance sector. The reason the finance sector had to start moving was because they saw that if they did not evolve, they were going to die. They saw what happened with robo-advisors and ultimately the impact that had on its business. They've been seeing the impact that decentralized exchanges are now having in terms of deal flow and money in these brokerage accounts. And in effect, what they did was they reluctantly opened their arms and started adopting it over the last 2-3 years. And truthfully, we are not that far from the real estate world following suit. You have big real estate developers partnering with these platforms and ultimately helping to create greater accessibility and ultimately deal flow for different real estate projects. So I hope you found this video helpful. And rather than put out our self-interest and say, subscribe to the channel and like this video, I'm just going to ask you to please share this. Share this with someone who you think might benefit. And ultimately, knowing that these platforms exist and these opportunities are out there to help get access to these types of assets that have historically helped generate wealth, that is something that you and I can each do as individuals without having to wait for this silver bullet from a systemic problem standpoint. So again, until next time, happy and safe investing. I'll speak with you soon.